welcome the opportunity to speak in the House today. From my own portfolio perspective, I welcome Minister Ring's announcement that the Sports Capital Programme will be up and running next year, and I welcome the announcement that funding will be available for the tourism initiative, The Gathering, in 2013. But that aside, this will undoubtedly be one of the defining budgets of this difficult period in Irish history. It was a budget that promised much from a government that did likewise. If we cast our minds back to this time last year, Labour and Fine Gael were part of a very vocal opposition, opposing Fianna Fáil at every turn. Their actions at that time were telling, particularly when they facilitated enabling Fianna Fáil in order to ensure that their budget passed. Fine Gael and Labour, in what could only be described as political opportunism, were quite happy for Fianna Fáil to take the hit. They would not risk showing their true colours and having to claim ownership of their collective strategy. That move allowed Fine Gael and Labour to go to the electorate in a long-awaited general election of February and put themselves forward as some kind of alternative. It allowed them to spend the first 10 months of their term blaming all of their woes on Fianna Fáil. They had no choice, you see, because Fianna Fáil made it so. The EU IMF made it so. Well, this budget has, in the most real and telling way so far, shone a light on the true politics and policy of Labour and Fine Gael in coalition. It shows what they hold dear, their principles and their priorities. Labour and Fine Gael in coalition are no different from Fianna Fáil and the Greens in coalition, or Fianna Fáil and the PDs in coalition, or the EU and IMF in coalition. The devastating fact for ordinary families is that together they employ the very same compass that Fianna Fáil used to such good effect to steer us into, and then deeper and deeper into, this crisis. With Budget 2012, Labour and Fine Gael, just as Fianna Fáil had done in the previous four budgets, made sure that it was the most vulnerable in our society that would suffer most. So it is that high earners remain protected, as young people with a disability, carers, widows, lone parents and people, particularly elderly people, who are dependent on fuel allowance, were targeted in a clear indication of the government's priority. It is truly unbelievable. It is absolutely astounding, unbelievable, that any so-called Labour Party in government anywhere would stand over, propose and endorse a budget that sees a couple on social welfare with 3 children lose more than a couple with 3 children earning £150,000 per year. But it's true, it is reality. This is what Labour and Fine Gael have conspired to do in government. They have conspired to continue the disproportionate assault on the most vulnerable people in our society, the very people that government are supposed to protect. The government had choices to make in this budget, between those that have and those who have not, between those that can afford to pay and those that can't, between the strong and the weak, the vibrant and the vulnerable. They chose the former at every opportunity. Yet again, those least able to fight their corner have been indiscriminately targeted. In February's general election, people voted for change. This budget is more of the same. It provides no solutions for ordinary people. It provides no solutions for the economy. Increases in stealth taxes, carbon taxes, petrol and diesel and other fuel charges, road tax, household charges and the like will hugely impact on already struggling families. I think for any of us in this House, we can only relate the effects of this budget to our own experiences inside and outside of politics. I could, with absolute ease, name scores and scores of families that I know personally and have dealt with over the last number of months and longer that will be driven further and further into hardship. They are largely a voiceless people and they have been targeted again and again. Their quality of life will be cut in a harsh and inhumane level. They, and in some instances their children, will go that little bit hungrier and that little bit colder. Life will be that little bit harder. By and large, they will survive the effects of these cuts, by and large, because people are resilient, because people adapt. Because if history has taught us anything, it has taught us that people can put up with terrible circumstances and come out the other side, but some will not. Some won't be that lucky, if lucky is the right word. All of those indicators that measure quality of life will trend negatively for these people. as will all of those indicators that show we are a caring people and that we care for each other, that we afford each other the right and support to get along. More people will live in and die from the cold. Stress, depression, anxiety and other mental illness will increase. Poverty, relative poverty and fuel poverty will increase. Suicide will increase. Alcoholism will increase. Life expectancy will decrease. This budget is a blueprint for chaos in these people's lives. Separately, and in relation to yet another minority group which has been targeted in this budget, I want, as one of the few female members of this House, to draw particular and focused attention to the adverse effects of this budget on women. This budget was a brutally savage budget on women, and in particular on vulnerable women. The 35% cut to the National Women's Council, an organisation whose raison d'etre is to promote women's rights and women's equality, is astonishing. It is unprecedented and is a terrible indictment on the government's considerations for women. In addition, the effect of the myriad of stealth charges introduced in this budget will have a real impact on mothers. With little or no employment in many parts of the country, many women lucky enough to have work are completely dependent on their own transport. Increases in the price of fuel, road tax and VAT will make running a car even more expensive. It will make balancing the household budget that little bit harder. I can't help but think of young mothers of school children in rural areas, like for example those at Adair National School in Fermoy in County Cork, whose school transport scheme was cut earlier this year. This government is now intent on heaping further hardship on these mothers. Heaven forbid they are lone parents or have more than 2 children. They will be even further disadvantaged. These women will be devastated by this callous budget. If ever women in general, and vulnerable women in particular, had a reason to support and implement political reform in this state, the proposals outlined in this budget serve as ample evidence that this House still needs serious change to be in any way reflective of the needs of women. Finally, Cathaoirleach, my party has long argued for an alternative economic strategy, that we cannot afford to pay billions of taxpayers' money into redundant toxic banks on one hand and demand even more from those same taxpayers on the other and still expect to run first world public services. The money simply is not there. Health and social welfare, 2 of the most important pillars of any society, were the focus of the cuts yet again. Health budgets are further cut. VAT increases will further compound this. When will we realise that we cannot continue to increase workloads and decrease budgets and services? The Minister can be guaranteed that we will continue, despite his best efforts, to retain pre-emergency and emergency services in the Cork area. Proposals to cut ambulance services in East and West Cork will continue to be met with resistance. Whatever the budget savings that the Government have to make, they are not worth lives. This budget will have far-reaching implications. Once again, this government has made sure that it is those least well able to take it who are asked to pay. The weak, the poor, the vulnerable, the elderly, the disabled, those living in rural Ireland. The list goes on. It is unjustifiable.